Sometimes it's not the harsh word that hurts the most. It's the tense silence that comes before her. That moment when the air seems heavier, the body closes, and something inside us already prepares for confrontation, even before a sound is made. We have all been faced with someone like this, a difficult person, rigid as stone, heated by the midday sun, someone who always seems armed, even when nothing has been said. And interestingly, the more we try to explain, convince, or defend ourselves, the more this rigidity strengthens. But what if the path wasn't the struggle? And if there was a way to go through this hardship without force, without dispute, without raising the voice? A simple, almost invisible shape, capable of disarming even the most closed hearts? In nature, it is not thunder that shapes the mountain. It's the water, silent, persistent. She doesn't argue with the rock. She doesn't try to overcome it. She just passes by. And as it passes, it transforms. There is ancient wisdom that observes this movement with reverence, a wisdom that does not impose itself, does not correct, does not directly confront. She understands that all rigidity comes from fear, and that fear does not dissolve with attack, but with space. When someone becomes difficult, they are usually defending something invisible, a wound, a belief, an internal territory that you believe is under threat. Responding harshly is like knocking harder on a locked door. The latch only adjusts further. But there are gestures that don't push. There are words that do not invade. There are expressions that do not require a response. And exactly for that reason, they cross over. This expression does not sound like an argument. It does not carry superiority. Don't try to win. It is born from a calm place where the ego does not need to prove anything. And maybe that's why it works, even when everything seems lost. Along this path, we will get closer to this simple gesture, not as a social technique, but as a spiritual posture towards others and towards ourselves. If at any point in your life you felt that reacting only made it worse, if you've ever wanted to respond without getting lost, to remain whole even in the face of tension, so remain here. Maybe what you're looking for isn't a new answer, but a new silence full of meaning. There are people who arrive like a wall. Even before any dialogue, we feel the resistance in the body. Shoulders stiffen, breathing shortens. The mind begins to look for arguments, defenses, strategies. It's as if, when faced with them, something within us automatically goes into a state of alert. These people are often called difficult, but this word hides more than it reveals, because no one is born rigid. Rigidity is built, layer by layer, like invisible armor forged throughout of time. Those who harden learned at some point that giving in was dangerous, that listening was losing, that softness was synonymous with weakness. And so, he began to live in permanent tension, not against others, but against the possibility of being injured again. When we approach this kind of confrontational presence, something predictable happens. Hardness meets hardness. The voice rises, the gesture closes, and dialogue stops being a bridge and becomes an arena. It's curious to observe how, in these moments, we are almost never really listening. We're just waiting for our turn to speak. Every sentence from the other is perceived as an attack. Every silence, like provocation. And what could be a human encounter turns into a duel of defenses. Human resistance works like the stumbling block. The more we try to forcefully push it, the more it stays in place. The more we insist on proving our point, the more the other person clings to theirs. Not out of deep conviction, but out of an instinct for self-preservation. There is an invisible noise in these encounters. It is not what is being said, but what is being protected. Pride, fear, identity. Internal territories that do not want to be invaded. And perhaps the biggest mistake is believing that difficult people need to be corrected, or convinced, or defeated in some kind of silent verbal battle. Most of the time, they don't need better answers. They need less threat. In nature, when two winds collide with force, a storm arises. But when one of them slightly changes direction, the violence dissipates, not because one beat the other, but because the shock ceased to exist. The same happens in human relationships. When we stop pushing, something unexpected happens. Resistance begins to lose its meaning, not because the other changed immediately, but because the field has changed. The tension that fueled hardness no longer finds support. This is a delicate point of the journey, because it requires something rare. Let go of the need to win. Here, it is not about submission, not even forced silence. It's about presence without attack, firm without rigidity, a kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself. Before any transformative expression, it is necessary to recognize this. Conflict doesn't just live between two people OAS. He is born within, and it only stays alive as long as it finds resistance to support itself. In the next step, we will get closer to the invisible principle that allows us to cross this wall, not climbing it, but passing through where it was never solid. There is a silent point where conflict cannot enter, not because he was expelled, but because there he finds no opposition. This point is not absence of presence, it is deep presence without the need for statement. In nature, nothing rushes to correct another. The tree does not argue with the wind. She moves. The river does not face the bank that limits it. He gets around her. And in doing so, it remains intact. There is an ancient wisdom that observes these movements with delicate attention. She realizes that harmony is not born from forced alignment, but from continuous adjustment. It's not about agreeing with everything, but about not becoming hardened inside. When two forces collide, they both wear out. Even the one that wins leaves smaller than it entered. But when one of them becomes flexible, something surprising happens. The other no longer has anything to fight against. This principle does not need to be named to be lived. It manifests itself when we choose not to respond immediately, when we breathe before reacting, when we allow space to exist between the stimulus and the response. It is during this interval that the rigidity begins to lose strength. Difficult people often expect resistance. They prepare for the fight before they even speak. And when this clash doesn't happen, something in them hesitates, like a closed fist that, when it doesn't find impact, starts to get tired. True harmony is not passive. It demands attention, presence, and inner courage. Because not confronting the other often means confronting one's own impulse to defend. It's easy to harden. It's difficult to remain soft when everything invites tension. In the forest, branches that do not give in to the wind are the first to break. Those who bend survive the longest storms, not because they are weak, but because they understand something essential. Permanence comes from adaptation. This principle extends to human relationships. When someone speaks from hardness, they usually expect hardness in return. It is the known standard. It is the safe ground of predictable conflict. But when we offer something different, not a sharp answer, not a correction immediate, we create a void. And the void disarms. Not because the other feels defeated, but because he doesn't feel threatened. In this space, something can finally breathe. Harmony does not try to convince. She doesn't prove it. She does not dispute narratives. It simply stays true to its own center. And that's what makes it so powerful. Over the centuries, this stance has been experienced more than explained, transmitted in gesture and silence in the subtle inclination of the body and voice. She recognizes that every person carries their own invisible struggles, and that touching these combats gently is more transformative than pointing them out. Before any word capable of disarming, there is this foundation. Do not enter the battlefield that the other offers. In the next step, we will get closer to the simple expression that arises exactly of this place, an expression that does not confront is not justified, and yet it crosses over. There is a simple expression, so simple that at first glance, it seems too small to carry any power real. She is not impressive. It doesn't sound deep, does not demonstrate intelligence or firmness, and maybe that's why it works. This expression is born when we stop trying to beat the other, when we abandon the need to prove who is right, when the body relaxes and the mind stops rehearsing answers. On the spiritual path that observes nature, as a silent teacher, this expression it appears as a gesture of recognition, not of agreement but of presence. It is said like this: I understand, just that. No add-on, no immediate explanation, without the famous but right after. When pronounced from the center, this word does not mean I agree with you. It means something deeper. I recognize your experience without invading your territory. And that's exactly what disarms. Difficult people often struggle to be seen, not just heard, seen, validated in their existence, even if their ideas are harsh, confusing, or defensive. When someone encounters resistance, they respond with more resistance. But when he finds recognition, something unexpected happens. The armor loses its usefulness. Saying, "I understand," is not bowing down. It's about creating space. In the spiritual tradition that honors invisible harmony, words are considered gestures. They shape the surrounding countryside. And a few words, even small ones, clear this field like clear water. When you say, "I understand," with real presence, looking, breathing without irony, the other feels something rare, security. And where there is security, conflict does not last long. Please note carefully. How many discussions continue just because no one cares? Do you feel recognized? How many tensions last because everyone tries to be heard, but no one is really seeing? This expression does not end the dialogue. She transforms him. Often, after it, comes silence. And silence, when it is not defensive, is fertile. It is during this interval that the other person, without realizing it, begins to relax. The voice drops a little. The tone changes. Rigidity, which once seemed part of identity, begins to seem unnecessary. If this idea resonates with you, it is a sign that something inside has already awakened, not because you need to change others, but because perhaps you are ready not to lose yourself in each clash. There is a purity in this gesture. He does not demand reciprocity. Don't wait for others to become kind. It only cleans the internal space of whoever utters it. And that is essential, because the true strength of this expression is not in the external effect, but in the inner effect. By saying, "I understand," you stop carrying the burden of correcting the world. You return to the axis itself, and in doing so, it becomes like water, present, flexible, impossible to grasp. Some conflicts dissolve immediately, others don't. But even when the other remains tough, something has already changed. You didn't harden together, and that is freedom. In the next step, we will look deeper into this silent effect, how this expression purifies from within, and why, many times, it transforms those who say it more than those who listen to it. There is something subtle that happens when we pronounce this expression from silence correct. It doesn't just address others. She returns. When we say, "I understand," something inside us slows down. The mind lets go, even if for a moment, of the impulse to react. The body releases old tension. It's as if the water has finally found a way to flow instead of remaining dammed. We often believe that the conflict is outside, on the other person, in her tone, in the words you choose. But most of the turmoil happens within, like an invisible whirlpool fueled by expectations, wounds, and unresolved stories. When someone is difficult, they are usually projecting something: fear, insecurity, desire for control. And when we react harshly, we mirror this projection without realizing it. Two dirty mirrors facing each other only multiply distortions. The expression that disarms works like clear water thrown onto this mirror. She does not discuss the reflected image. She cleans. This gesture does not try to change the other. It changes the internal field of whoever practices it. And that changes everything. In the spiritual experience that honors everyday purification, it is believed that what is not clean inside ends up looking for a way out through conflict. Harsh words, excessive reactions, the need to win. These are all forms of discharge accumulated tensions. When we say, "I understand," with presence, we interrupt this flow. The energy that would go into the attack returns to the center, and there in the center there is silence. This silence is not empty, it's clarity. It allows you to understand something essential. Not every disagreement needs immediate resolution. Not every difference requires a response. Not every discomfort is an invitation to react. Purification happens when we stop identifying with the role that conflict tries to play. Offer us the role of right, of the wronged, what needs to be validated. When you release these papers, something dissolves, and what remains is just presence. Like a light rain falling on a restless lake, the water does not tell the lake to calm down. She just plays, and little by little the surface calms down. That is the true power of this expression. She doesn't force change. It creates the conditions for change to be possible. Even if the other person remains tough, you are no longer tied to the fight. You no longer carry the burden of convincing him. You no longer need to win. And that is purification. Because when the conflict does not find internal resonance, it loses strength. Like fire without oxygen, it goes out. This practice reveals something profound. Often, the most difficult person we encounter is within ourselves. It's the part that wants to react, correct, impose. And by saying, "I understand," we also welcome it, without obeying it. In the next step, we will bring this stance to modern everyday life. For difficult conversations at work, in the family, on the networks, and see how such a simple gesture can become a silent ritual of daily balance. Bringing this expression into everyday life is simpler and more challenging than it seems, because the modern world moves fast, reacts fast, demands fast responses. And at this rate, there is almost no room for the delay between stimulus and response. At work, for example, discussions are rarely just about tasks. They carry expectations, pressures, silent insecurities. A comment crossed in a meeting can activate old defenses. A dry email can sound like an attack. And without realizing it, we enter into the same game of rigidity that we swore to avoid. This is precisely where the expression finds its practical value. If someone speaks harshly, saying, "I understand," does not mean agreeing with the content. It means recognizing the emotional state behind it. And that changes the field of conversation. Often, after this gesture, it is possible to add something more, but not right away. First, space. Then, if necessary, clarity. In a family, the challenge is usually even greater, because there is history. There are old wounds. There are crystallized roles. "You were always like this." "You never change." Phrases that harden like concrete. In this context, expression acts as a silent ritual. It interrupts the automatic cycle. Instead of reacting from the past, you respond from the present. On social media, the field is even more hostile. Opinions are thrown like stones. Toughness is rewarded with attention, and the confrontation becomes a spectacle. Here, perhaps the most powerful use of this expression is internal. Say, "I understand" to yourself before responding, or choose not to respond. Not every provocation deserves a pass. Not all noise requires echo. This stance does not isolate. She protects. It allows you to move through the world without absorbing all the tension that circulates. Like someone who walks through the rain without fighting it, just accepts getting their hands wet feet. Over time, this gesture becomes habit, and habit becomes posture. People around them notice something different, even without knowing how to name it. There is less friction, less drama, less need to prove. This does not mean that conflicts disappear, but they no longer occupy the center. They become events, not identities. Using this expression as a daily practice is an act of spiritual care. It's choosing, over and over again, not to lose yourself. Do not harden. Don't move away from yourself. And perhaps this is the greatest transformation possible in a world that lives in a state of constant reaction. Remain whole, even when everything invites fragmentation. In the last step, we will close this path with a broader reflection, a return to the invisible that sustains these simple gestures and the silent whisper that accompanies us when we choose harmony. In the end, it's not about the expression itself. It's about the place where it comes from. When we say, "I understand," without harshness, something old reorganizes itself inside. It's like returning to a forgotten land, where silence is not absence, but company. There is no rush to respond, no urgency to win. There is just presence. Life continues to offer difficult encounters. Rigid people will continue to cross our path. Harsh words will still come, unexpected, like gusts of cold wind. But from that point on, something changes. You no longer need to harden together. There is an invisible strength in not resisting, a calm firmness that does not depend on approval. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It just remains. By choosing this simple gesture, you do not abandon your truth. You anchor it deeper, away from the noise, away from the need to defend yourself at all times. In nature, everything that remains alive knows when to give in. The bamboo bends, the water goes around, the mountain awaits. Nothing there fights against what is. Everything cooperates with what passes. Perhaps this is the most important memory. We don't need to carry each conflict as if it were destiny. Some are just clouds crossing the sky. Others, echoes of pain that do not belong to us. When we learn not to react automatically, we make room for something more subtle guide us. An internal sense of balance. A silent intelligence that does not shout, but guides. If you allow it, this stance begins to spread. In the tone of your voice, in rhythm with your step, in the way you listen. And little by little the world around you responds. Not because you tried to change it, but because he stopped feeding it with resistance. Sign up and continue walking with us along the path of the soul. Here, every simple gesture is a portal, every silence a teaching, and each encounter an opportunity to remain whole, because maybe true power isn't in transforming others, but in not losing yourself. What if what we call conflict is just an invitation in disguise, a whisper from the unseen reminding us that harmony cannot be achieved? Does she allow herself?